It's November, and it's the middle of November. That means that it's the time in the northern hemisphere of darkness and gloom and remembering the dead. And of course, on Remembrance Sunday, we remember those who died in those terrible two wars of the last century. And what are we going to do faced with gloom and death? Well, first of all, recognize that they are there. So a lot of us are thinking at the moment about the climate change and what's to be done about that. And we must not run away from that. We must recognize that there is stuff there and that we need to do something. But secondly, and this is always true, we must be aware that God is in charge. God is somehow or other in the story, and the story therefore is not going to end in catastrophe, even though it sometimes looks like it. And I think that's what you've got in the three readings we hear this weekend. In the first reading, the book of Daniel, it's a terrible picture of the world simply falling apart. But somehow or other, Daniel is able to say, no, it's going to be all right because God is in the story. Then the second reading, it's the slightly difficult letter to the Hebrews we've been following for some weeks now. It's a rough piece of work, but it emphasizes both those things again. God is in the story, and it's going to be painful because it talks about Jesus' sacrifice. And then the Gospel is a very interesting one. This week in the Gospel, you've got those same two features of the picture. First of all, in Mark, his little apocalypse, they sometimes call it. In those days, after that tribulation, the sun is going to be darkened. And if that's happening, then you know there's trouble. And the moon is not going to give her light, and the stars will be falling from the sky. So real disaster in the universe. But then there is a sign of hope, because then they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with much power. And if he's coming with power, that's the word of God. And then he will send his messengers, or his angels, if you want to translate it, and he will gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the end of heaven. So it's powerful stuff, and absolute confidence that God can look after the whole of this battered universe of ours. Then he tells a very plain story about the fig tree. When the fig tree produces leaves and starts to grow, then you know that the summer is near. A basic image from the peasant experience of a Galilean like Jesus. But we're not to despair, because this generation is not going to pass away until this all happens. So heaven and earth will pass away. And now we're thinking about the beginning of the Bible. Heaven and earth, God created at the beginning. But my word, says Jesus, and we must listen to this and listen with confidence, will never pass away. But we do not know. We're not in charge. We are not God. So about that day or hour, no one knows anything. Not the angels in heaven, not the Son, but only the Father. So only God knows what is going on. But remember this, God does know what's going on. And therefore, even if there is an apparent disaster approaching, it's never going to be a final disaster, because God is in charge.